Well, good afternoon and welcome to the How Much is Too Much Water for Your Yard webinar. We're hosted by the Roseville Utility Exploration Center in partnership with Environmental Utilities here in Roseville. My name is Braden Mitchell and I'm the Senior Interpretive Services Specialist with the Utility Exploration Center. Now, for those of you who may not know us, we are a part of our utility departments here in Roseville, California, where all of our utilities are municipally owned and operated. Those include solid waste, stormwater, wastewater, electric, and of course water. The Utility Exploration Center is a one-of-a-kind environmental learning center focused on bringing visitors information on protecting our natural resources. Our topics include energy efficiency, renewable technology, recycling and waste reduction, and of course water conservation. We offer school programs, events, we have a free visitor center, we do workshops and webinars like this one. Now we're happy to announce that our visitor center just recently reopened, and I'd love to invite all of you to come down and explore Roseville Utilities with us, because together we can build a sustainable community. Now today, like I said, we have a ton of great information all about your yard and irrigation. But before we launch into the webinar, I wanted to take a few minutes to go over some housekeeping things. First of all, we are recording this webinar. So if there's stuff as you're listening along that you might want to go back and rewatch, we will have this recording up on our website, which is roseville.ca.us/gardening workshops. Give us about a week to get that up, but then it's free and you guys can watch and rewatch as many times as you'd like. Also, we do have the ability for you guys to ask questions today. So in the upper right-hand corner of your slide, you should see a small Q&A box, about where you see the circle on my slide now. When you click that box, the side panel will open up, and at the very bottom, there's a button that says Ask a Question. Once you click that button, then you're able to type in whatever question comes up. You can also name yourself on there. That is completely optional. We do have a couple other folks with our water efficiency department on our webinar today who are going to be doing their best to answer those questions in the background. Now, if they don't get to all of those questions, don't worry. We are going to grab every question that was asked, and we're going to create a frequently asked question sheet, which we will also put up in about a week on our website. And don't worry about that either. I will send out a link to all that website for all of you guys to pull those down. Now, I think that's about it for the housekeeping stuff. Let me introduce our actual presenter today. Today we have Justin Black. Justin has been with the Water Efficiency Department in the city of Roseville for almost 8 years. He has about 20 years of irrigation, landscaping, and agriculture experience. He's a certified irrigation auditor. He's got a C27 landscape contractor, and he's got his Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Sciences at CSU Chico. And in his spare time, Justin also runs a micro farm. I think that's about it. Justin, are you ready to take it away?
I am. Thank you, Braden. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about how much water is too much water for your yard and the things that go along with that. Some of the things we're looking to do today is learn about saving water, saving money, learn new things, explore new irrigation technologies, and specifically learn about plant water requirements. And that's more about me. We talked about that enough already. This is a quote I really like about irrigation scheduling. It is the science and/or art of applying the proper amount of water at the proper time to provide maximum usable soil moisture in a plant's root zone without causing harmful stress. Irrigation scheduling is a balancing act between applying too much water and not enough to meet the plant needs at a particular stage of growth. I may have messed that up a little bit, but you get the idea. Right there it says causing harmful stress. Harmful stress can come in the form of too little and too much water, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the what, how, and where. We're going to cover kind of the high points of a very complicated topic, plant type, root depth, ET factor, which I'll explain more of shortly, frequency, how you're going to irrigate, what device you're putting water down with, and a lot about your soil. So this is kind of a silly comparison. We've all seen these plants and we all know where we can find them. The cactus in the desert rarely does it get water. It grows in sandy soils that don't hold water. And over here on the left, we have cattails and lilies, things that need constant water. This is a kind of interesting way of saying all plants come from somewhere. So the plants that we buy in the nursery are adapted to a particular climate and a particular frequency of watering. And so that's why it's really important to think about what we're planting here and how frequently it wants to be watered. The plants in your yard don't want to be watered as much as the lawn in your yard. They're actually used to periods of drying out and they're really looking for it. So we're going to cover just a couple of examples of high, medium, and low water use plants. And this is a great illustration of the amount of inches per water in a year. Those different high and low water use plants require to grow. So your grass is a high water use. It's the highest water use category. This area is going to require over 50 inches a year of water that is actively absorbed by the grass. So imagine the grass you have with water 50 inches tall. That's just over, it's actually probably 54 or 57. It's over 4 feet tall, nearing 5 foot of water. And that's water that's 100% perfectly used. And when you think about the human factor, irrigation system inefficiencies, areas that cover too much water, too little, our lack of scheduling, we're probably using twice that on an annual basis. So there's a tremendous ability to save water with turf reductions or conversions to these low water use plants. We get some really amazing, beautiful plants that are using about 5 inches of water a year. So in the high water use category, just a few high points here. There's a ton of plants, but I'm going to have 3 examples on each slide. Foxgloves, hydrangeas, white birch, and turf in the background there. A lot of white birch planted, not so much anymore. You saw more of it in the 80s and 90s here. They don't last very long here in my experience. Medium water use plants. So on the left, the red barbarous is actually, I might have messed that up, but it's got little spikes on it. So it's great for planting under your teenage children's bedroom window. Keep them in there at night. The boxwood, which is very common, and loropetalum fringe flower on the right. That is available in a green as well, and both have beautiful pink blossoms pretty heavily throughout the growing season. And low water use plants. On the right, that's a western redbud tree. Tons of beautiful blossoms this time of year. The center is lantana confetti, multicolor. And typically you'll see low water use plants have some sort of leaf structure that's unique that helps them be low water use, whether it's particularly like a hairy leaf or something waxy that helps seals it in the moisture. There are some traits that can help you identify those plants just by looking. And then we're going to talk a little bit about succulents, very popular right now. Succulents use quite a bit of water infrequently. And so they're really great in pots for things that you're going to forget to water on purpose for a while. When I see them planted in the ground in this area, they're typically overwatered and having disease issues because they're tied into a drip system that's watering multiple times a week when these plants really need very infrequent waterings. Most irrigation controllers are capable of doing a special schedule where you can pick a single watering every so many days, any number of calendar days between 1 and 30. So you could decide to water these once every 14 days with the standard irrigation controller that you probably already have, and give them their own dedicated irrigation or just hand water. So a good place to find information about the plants. If you're buying new plants, the plant tag is awesome. It's got tons of good info, root depth, think about the future size, really important. On the left, WUCLs, it's a water use classification of landscape species. And what's cool about that is it actually checks the water use based on your region. So everything's going to be specific to your city, and the the climate in that location, because some things will change their water use classification depending on where you are. So moving into soil. Soil is a really important part of the equation in plant water use, and we're going to talk about soil probably more today than you expected. So on the right, I have 3 links that will give you the ability to judge your soil texture. Soil texture is basically the percentages of silt, sand, and clay, which are the mineral ingredients to all your soils. And on the right there, they're actually kind of fun science experiments. If you've got kids, they might help you out with some of those, but each one of those links will give you a different way of figuring out soil texture. And this is called the soil triangle. And so it helps, there's a lime green line on there that will help you see the example here. They're showing a sample soil, which is, if you follow the percentages, broke down 42% silt, 23% clay, and the rest sand, which is covered up by something on my screen. And that puts you in a loam category. So loam is a prime farming soil. It's well drained, it has a good water holding capability. It's kind of an ideal mixture. If you live here in Roseville, it's very unlikely that you have any loam. There are a few places that are near old riverbeds that have loamy soil here. For the most part, everybody here has a clay-based soil or even a clay loam. Clay soils are going to be very specific, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So soil saturation, I like to use the analogy of a sponge and a bucket of water. You dip a sponge in the water, you squeeze it out, you pull it out, and it's just dripping water. So that's saturated soil. It is actively losing water. It cannot hold all the water that's in it permanently. At the point that the sponge has let go of excess water and is holding the amount of water that it's capable and comfortable of holding, that's called field capacity. And the water at field capacity is available for plants to pick up and use. At the point that the soil has dried out and the plants can no longer pull water from the soil, it's called wilting point. We've seen, gosh, our summer squashes, our pumpkins, those things look really droopy at the end of the day. Those are nearing wilt. That is a wilting point. There is a permanent wilting point, which is the point of no return when we've lost the plant. But the water between field capacity and wilting point is available water to the plant. And so thinking about the pore structure of the soil, about 50% of the space in a cubic foot of soil is available for water pores to fill up. And then here we're going to compare infiltration and percolation. So we've got 3 examples, sand, silt, and clay. Sand is obviously the best at infiltrating. So if we took a cup of water to the beach and we poured it on the sand, that water is going to go straight down. It's not going to move out very far, and it's going to go down really quickly. If you go outside here in Roseville and you pour it on your native soil, it's probably going to run away from you. It's not going to go down, and it's going to take a while to go anywhere. So that's a very low infiltration rate. And in comparison, when you look at the percolation, the water, once it gets into the soil, where does it go? Here with the sand category on the left-hand side of your screen, we see the water goes down quite deep in a very narrow path. And with the clay, it didn't get very deep, and it mostly spread out because it took a while to absorb. That can be further shown with this slide here. In the very bottom category, so from top to bottom, these are on the top side best infiltration rates, so coarse sand, essentially rock, broken rock, like you would have in a drain, and on the very bottom clay. And going from left to right, it's percentage of slope. So 0 to 4% is essentially flat. You would consider a concrete slab that was within that range to be completely flat to your eye. And this is saying that a clay soil that's completely flat can only absorb 0.13 inches in an hour. So 1/10 of an inch in an hour, which is, just a tiny bit of water is how quickly that clay can absorb water. And if you're on a 16% slope, it's 3/100ths of an inch, which is just like a trace sprinkling of water. We actually mapped out what is a 16% slope because it's not 16 degrees, it's percent slope. 16% slope is 6 foot of distance and 1 foot up. It's actually not a very steep slope. So it's really important to think about how quickly water can go into your soil when we're doing our irrigation scheduling, and we're gonna kind of tie those points together here shortly. So the flip side, you have your infiltration and you have your percolation. So this is the flip side of that is how long and how much water can the soil hold. So again, coarse sand and gravel is going to have the least ability to hold water and hold the least amount of it, whereas silts and clays are going to hold the most. So the soil we have here in Roseville is really extreme in nature. It does a really poor job getting water into it, and it does a really great job holding on to it. It is actually the most extreme in both the categories of infiltration and water holding capacity. So what does that mean for your plants? Here is an example of 2 plants that were watered in different frequencies. If you're constantly giving your plants a tiny bit of water in the same space, the plants don't need to look very hard for that water. In the left, we have a very shallow root zone. This plant's going to be very susceptible to disease, to drying out. It's not going to be drought tolerant. It's not going to have good access to the nutrients in the soil profile. So frequent shallow waterings equal shallow roots. And this is a good example of that. We see a lot more grasses being trimmed longer than we did 20, 30 years ago. It used to be in style to have a very short grass. And if you live on the east side of town and have some of those older sprinkler systems, you know that the sprinklers are only designed to pop up about an inch. Now we're seeing sprinklers pop up 4 inches used to be the standard, and now 6 inches is pretty much standard because we're really encouraging about a 4-inch maintenance height on grasses. And that's going to result in more ability to prevent evaporation, a stronger, denser root system. We usually talk about whatever's on top is on the bottom. So if you've got 4 inches of grass growing on top, you probably have 4 inches of soil depth, root zone depth in the soil. And so longer grass is better. Here's a couple of pictures of issues that are caused with frequency and depth of watering. On the right, that happened in nature, but it's a really extreme example of surface rooting. On the left, we've all seen these lawns. That's not the tree's fault. It's not that tree is a terrible tree and is notorious for surface rooting. That tree was watered as if it was grass. It did not have a dedicated irrigation to it, and it was planted in grass. So basically, that tree got enough water to grow within the first few inches of the ground, and it never was able to go deeper and look for deep water. Ultimately, the tree should have had tree watering wells and been on a separate zone with an infrequent and deeper watering schedule. So not to say that we should have given it a week's worth of water in one start time, but we should have maybe only watered it once a week in multiple start times that were spaced in a way that the soil would let that water absorb and go deep into the profile. So capillary action is how plants move water through them. On the left, you may have seen this science experiment before. It's food coloring water and I believe celery. And you can demonstrate the water moving through the plant with the colors. On the right is an illustration. The water moves through the leaves for cooling mostly. Only about 1% of the water absorbed by the plant is used in photosynthesis. Word of the day is evapotranspiration, or ET, as I might have mentioned before. ET is the combined water use for a time period and a particular crop in both evaporation and transpiration. So evaporation is the sun hitting the soil and the ground, and transpiration is water that actually moves through the plant. And we're going to show you how that applies to your landscape. So the California Department of Water Resources and many other people and agencies run similar systems, have put together this network of weather stations since about the early 80s. And these have been mapping real-time weather data and calculating ET based on a cool season crop, so basically a high water use. And then all the other crops are a percentage of ET down from there. So they have the crop coefficients or the percentages for every type of crop, whether it's watermelons or almonds, but to you is probably more important if it's low water use, medium water use. So to put it simply, a high water use plant such as grass is going to be 1 or 100%. A medium water use is going to be about 0.5 or 50%. Low water use 0.3 and below. Some very low water use plants are 0.1 or 10% of the same value. So this chart on the left shows you how ET can save water. So the green curve there is the weather-based demand of ET, and the blue is kind of an estimation of how most people maintain or adjust their controllers. We have them set low or off during the winter, and then we go through a period of adjusting up, whether it's a single adjustment or a few adjustments, and then kind of plateauing all season. Oftentimes we water way too long, too late. I see people's controllers set as if it's still July into November and December most of the time. So there's a tremendous water saving potential if you were to be able to irrigate based on ET on a regular basis. On the right, this is a picture of the weather station. Looks like something that landed on another planet. And basically it's covered in high-end scientific sensors. It's picking up soil temperature, solar radiation, wind speed, wind direction, humidity, temperature, and probably something else that I can't remember. It's important to think about how you're putting the water down. And oftentimes I see controllers set, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes a zone. The zones are set the same, and there's different application methods on every zone. So in this case, we're comparing the flow rates of a hose, a bubbler, and a drip emitter. In the field, I see the same time set to a rotor sprinkler, as a spray sprinkler, as a drip zone. All have vastly different application rates. So this comparison is comparing how many minutes it takes to fill up a 1 gallon container. So that's a milk jug on your upper right corner. 5 seconds with a garden hose, 10 minutes with a 1 gallon per minute bubbler. A bubbler would be a common way of watering trees, and 600 minutes with a 1 gallon per hour drip emitter. So giving those zones that are different the same amount of runtime is not effective. I'm just going to touch briefly on drip here for 2 points I wanted to add. This brown tubing on the left is called emitter in line and is often referred to as Netafim. And Netafim is the originator of this style of drip tubing. And if you look closely, you can see little circles of water evenly spaced in that tubing. So the idea is you lay this out as a grid. The tubing can be specified with emitters pre-installed every 12, 18, or 24 inches, and then you would specify the emitter flow rate as well. And what it does is water like a big grid and more accurately mimic a natural rain or natural soaking of the soil. It's great in a lot of ways. It gives you a really robust system. There's no individual emitters on the outside of the tubing to get broken or knocked off. There's no small 1/4 inch tubing. It's actually quite labor saving as well, in my opinion. The chart on the right is kind of a handy dandy field guide to help you judge the flow rate of an emitter based on how fast the drips are coming out and if there's any sort of connected stream on the drips. I've been seeing a lot of really high flow rate emitters lately being installed, 4 gallon per hour and above in a lot of cases. Distribution uniformity, so thinking about not all spaces that you're watering at the same time are getting the same amount of water. On the bottom there, this graph shows that there's more water put out closer to the sprinkler than there is further away. And the industry figured out that they could solve that by doing what's called head-to-head coverage. So the chart above shows this sprinkler sprays this sprinkler, and the overlap tends to average out the distribution uniformity to an acceptable level. It's still fairly rough at most head-to-head coverages. The new rotating nozzles, if you've seen them, there are multiple streams of water. They're an efficient technology. They have a much better distribution uniformity as well as resistance to wind blowing and things of that nature. So distribution uniformity comes into play in all forms of irrigation, including drip. Another optimal head coverage. So this is just a square lawn. This one's saying 60 feet, but ultimately this coverage could be the same for much smaller spaces. It takes 9 heads to accurately water this lawn in order to maintain head-to-head coverage. Oftentimes people will say, well, 9 heads, that's going to use way too much water. I'm going to get too much runoff. It is important to have equal coverage because if you were to do this with less heads, you would be overwatering some areas to properly water the others. And so really to prevent runoff, in this case, you're looking at doing what we call cycle and soak, which is watering to the infiltration rate of your soil, and then repeating the process an hour later multiple times in order to fill the root profile with an appropriate amount of water at an appropriate depth. We're going to cover that a little bit more in the next few slides. This is something that I find pretty helpful and has multiple applications. You'll probably find yourself looking for this chart later on. It's a good way to estimate flows of a zone and to understand radiuses and coverage. So there's a lot going on here. Understand that a traditional spray sprinkler with a smaller radius puts out a vastly different amount of water than the 15-foot radius. So 5 foot and 15 is about 10 times the water. That column on the very right, that's a full circle, 360 degree. So the flow rates in gallons per minute vary tremendously. Sometimes these charts are really helpful in diagnosing if you have pressure issues. You can go through and tally up how many, roughly what foot radius and roughly what arc, third arc or half arc, 180 degrees, and you can tally up the estimated flow rate on these. And even though it's not real world and it's not exact, it'll get you pretty close in diagnosing potential issues. Sometimes you can find a subsurface lateral break by going through and inventorying these and then comparing these numbers to what you can read from the water meter. But that's kind of an advanced thing, but this is a really helpful chart. Okay, overwatering. What does it look like? This yellow plant on the left is actually drowning. Oftentimes, overwatering looks just like no water at all. So sadly, we give them more water. And this is a clay-based soil on the right. The soil has a very low infiltration rate. We talked about, was it 0.13 inches an hour? So 1/10 of an inch an hour on that perfectly flat grass that they're standing on there. So that's going to take many, many hours to drain out, many days potentially. So in this case, the plant was essentially just sitting in a sealed pot, and the roots do need an opportunity to breathe. So yellowing, saturation, overwatering, and then moving forward. Root rot, phytophthora, root fungus, these are plant diseases, and you can't really solve or cure the diseases well. Most of the time the plant will struggle, it will be stunted, it will be likely the end of the plant, and this is caused by too frequent, mostly too frequent, but somewhat too long watering. So I like to say more water is not always better. The plants can't look better than if they have the right amount of water, and you'll never know if you are using too much if you don't try to use less. Oftentimes we fall into a habit of setting a controller, certain number of days, certain number of minutes, and that's what you're used to. If you're lucky enough to not be having plants that are drowning in pots of water, you could be losing a lot of that water to deep percolation. That's also pulling your nutrients away. So over time, you're really depleting your soils. It's a pollution issue, but mostly it's going to be an issue for the quality of your yard. As that water gets deeper, the chart on the left shows that it's exponentially less available to the plant, both in nutrients and water. Planted pots or potted plants are a really good example of that. If they get tied into the same system on a drip, I see that very frequently. The soil is 100% different. It's almost entirely organic material. It's very well drained. It has virtually no water holding capability. And as soon as you turn on that drip system, water's going to start coming out of the pot, and that's leaching nutrients. And it's really best that they're not on the same system. Kind of best that they're hand watered to some degree, but if possible, they should be on their own zone. And you're going to water them totally differently. Same thing for vegetable gardens. We spend a lot of money on raised beds. We bring in a lot of nice soil. We tie them into our existing drip system, and we either underwater them or overwater the rest of our yard as a result. Vegetable garden beds, this time of year, a lot of people putting them in. Veggies are a high water use because we want to get fruit off of them. The rest of your yard is probably a low water use, so 30% of the same water needs, and much more infrequent needs the rest of your yard. Really 2 times a week is going to be more than enough, and veggies are going to be nearly every day in the summer heat. So I mentioned probably one slide too early. This is a watering schedule that we put together. It's an estimated scheduler that helps you set your timer on a monthly basis. And there's a lot going on here because it's covering spray sprinklers on grass, spray on shrubs, drip system, shrubs, and rotor sprinklers, which are the big single stream moving sprinklers you might see on golf courses or on larger lawns. So this is going to be an estimation of a typical zone. And there's a second slide that we'll pass over here shortly that kind of gives you a rough rundown of what these are estimated off of. But on a monthly basis, how would you set that zone? And this is a baseline. It's not an absolute. There are going to be yards that are underwatered by this, and there are going to be yards that are overwatered by this. So this is a good starting point for you. But a few things I really want to point out about this controller, or about this scheduler, and this is specific to our area. This is something we developed. Turf with a fixed spray sprinkler is going to be one of your most common things that we're either overwatering or having the most waste from. And one of the largest reasons we get waste from that zone is from that water percolation and filtration that we talked about earlier. If you were to work the minutes backwards, you would come up with about 4 or 5 minutes is the maximum runtime that you can have before you get water running off. And it kind of depends on slope and how much loam soil was brought in when the planting was done. But you'll notice on all of the, so the very top row going across all the months is turf with a fixed spray. You'll never see the number of minutes per cycle exceed 4 minutes there. And so obviously it's going to need more than 4 minutes daily. And so the way we fix that is we don't do daily. We do, the maximum water is going to be in July. We're recommending about 64 minutes a week. And that breaks down to 4 days, 4 cycles of 4 minutes. And what that's going to do is give you that cycle and soak. And that's going to give time in between for the grass to dry out. It's essentially every other day. And that water is going to get a chance to move down through the root zone and move deeper. And that's going to encourage those deeper, healthier roots that we were talking about. Also, something to point out, on all of the shrubs, you won't see more than 2 days a week watering. That's not because we're mean, that's because that's what they really want. Low water use shrubs, which is the majority of your yards, and medium water use are more than happy with 2 days a week watering. Most of your irrigation controllers are capable of doing an A, B, and C program. So that one down there, A, B, and C. Sometimes the button just says program. It can be a little complicated and a little daunting to program in A, B, and C programs and multiple start times, but it's really what's necessary to encourage deep rooting, to prevent runoff, to give the frequency and duration that's necessary. Every A, B, and C on the controller is like its own controller. So if you set something up on B and decide you don't like it and you move to A and start over, whatever you have on B, if it has a day, a start time, and a run time, will occur. And so you have to be careful because you can actually like double and triple program your timers and inadvertently have some high water use. This is something we can help walk you through in our residential house call program, and we'll mention that later on in the program. And those are those details. We'll gloss over that. We actually have that schedule available as a plastic card, which we give out for free, and I believe the participants will be or were emailed a copy of that schedule. This is another tool that we're in the process of developing or have just finished. We're going to be teaching a class specifically on how to utilize this calculator. And this is not a live spreadsheet, but here in the class is just a photo of it. But in reality, this is a live self-calculating spreadsheet, and it looks really, really complicated, but it's not. There's only 3 things you have to do to set this calculator up, and it's going to compare your current programming with your actual flow rates of your irrigation zones against what would be expected and the ET, the evapotranspiration. So you're going to change the month. You're going to put in your timer settings and a few meter reads initially, and then going forward, every time you adjust your timer, which should be at least monthly, you're going to be able to just change a couple of things on here, and it's going to give you a comparison of whether you're over or under the ET budget. Totally separate class on this, but that should be coming up in about a month. And hydrozones. So you've probably heard this term before. Hydrozones are pairing similar water use and similar type of plants together. So not just low water use trees and shrubs, but low water use trees together, low water use shrubs together, medium water use shrubs together. So in this case, they're color coded by the hydrozones, by their water use in the colors there. And the hydrozone relates to a valve. So you have a certain number of valves in your yard. Maybe you have 3 in the front, 3 in the back. Each one of those valves could or should be a hydrozone and have similar things grouped on it. So ways to monitor soil moisture. There's all kinds of things out there. You can do it by hand. That's a great option. There are soil moisture sensors, although somewhat out of favor. They do have good applications. In the top middle, the moisture probe, moisture gauge. This one here is a frog. Not all of them that we have are frog-like, but these are free. We love giving these out. They do a great job. They help us kind of get comfortable with that infrequent watering because we can put a number and see what's going on down below. So you just stick this in the soil and the gauge moves right away. Anything over 5 is well watered and can wait another day or so, and anything below 5 is time to rewater. You know, see our office for those or schedule a house call. We're more than happy to get those in your hands. The other 2 options are moving towards more technology and convenience and surprisingly affordable. Top left corner is an on-site weather station. They can be wireless. They can be added to a lot of the controllers you already have, typically for about $150 in parts. On the right side, this is a Wi-Fi weather-based irrigation controller. So this is going to use that ET data that we talked about, and it's going to be controlled largely from your phone. If these are programmed properly, you can set up the zones tremendously simply. The user interface is very simple. You're clicking, it's a picture of a grass, it's a picture of this type of sprinkler. You told it very simple things, but behind that is all that data that we talked about before. And this is going to track every zone based on today's regular weather patterns and how much ET they use, how much water they use, and then it's going to figure out how to apply it. And because you told it the soil type and the type of way you're watering it, and it's going to actually figure out how to break that up into cycle and soak to minimize runoff as well. They can be incredibly powerful, and surprisingly, that's the cheapest option on, well, this one's free, But as far as the convenience factor and the technology factor, that's least expensive. So that unit, that one I show there, it's made by Raccio. That company only exists to make smart irrigation controllers. They're kind of new to the market, but they provide a really consumer-friendly based approach to a very complicated topic. There's a link at the very top to a video, but below that is the link that makes the $230 Raccio 3 available for $75. That is through Regional Water Authority, and they're a partner here in the Sacramento area, and most of the local water agencies or water purveyors qualify. So you actually buy it through their website, and it brings the cost down to $75. Raccio does offer installers for this as well. I've never personally used that program, but it can be a little daunting to some consumers to think about setting it up. It's actually quite friendly. I personally think the hardest part is pairing it to Wi-Fi. So if you're good at that, or if you like smart home stuff, it's a really great option to further smarten your home. So here are some links, and sorry this page doesn't do them justice. There's a lot of great stuff on here. Our rebate link is on here, so we're offering $1 a square foot towards turf removal. We call it cash for grass, and you do need to have a live green grass and have it still attached to the ground before you call us. And we come out and take a picture and take some measurements. It's a really easy program to use. There are some requirements. There are a bunch of other links on here. WUCLs, which I mentioned earlier. Be Water Smart Info has, actually not, the Beyond the Drought has another scheduler that is very interactive. And local irrigation supply centers, those are 3 places, 2 here in Roseville, that are going to have high quality irrigation components that you're not going to find at the big box stores. A lot of the things we talk about, they have a very limited supply at Home Depot and Lowe's, and so oftentimes those are the best resources. And I mentioned WaterWise house calls before. You're very fortunate to live in the city of Roseville and receive what we hope is great customer service from our staff. We have the ability to come out and give personal evaluations of your property, your irrigation system, help with basic leak detection, and offer some water saving devices as well. So you can call that phone number to schedule an appointment, WaterWise house call, or let them know you saw the video.
All right, Justin, that was awesome. I appreciate your time, your knowledge, and kind of taking the time out of your day to share a little with us. I was curious if maybe we have a couple questions from the background that we might be able to read out to you.
Sure.
Yeah, Justin, it's John. Hey, I had a couple of questions regarding how to water container plants a little more. Can you go more in depth on container plants?
Possibly. It's going to be one of those things that might be better suited to a house call, just because I'd like to figure out if your system has the capacity to allow kind of shifting of how things are assigned to give it an automated zone. In some cases, a battery operated timer can be a helpful addition to a system that's already maxed out in wires or valves. So it's something I could answer better in person, but basically, going back to the principles of the class, we're talking about soil type, root depth, plant water needs, and application or infiltration rate of water. Because those container plants and vegetable garden beds are so different from our native soil here, and we're growing a much different crop in them, we really need to handle them very differently. So the runtime should be very short. Even potentially just a few minutes on drip, because it's going to move very quickly through there. And what we want to do is get the material in there, depending on the soil. Some of the soils that we buy at the garden centers, they're basically just chipped up wood that are partially decomposed. Has kind of a marginal holding capacity, but there's also people that are getting really great loam soils, mineral soils in those pots. And so depending on what's there, you're going to have to kind of find a sweet spot between getting water in and keeping water from draining out, keeping those nutrients in the pot. Oftentimes we see the most nutrient leaching, and really those potted plants are suffering the most. They're very depleted, very yellow, very weak, and sometimes attributed to being root bound. But you'll see that nice brown trail of water coming out of the potted plant across the beautiful patio, and that's the nutrient leaching. So that's all the good stuff from the soil that we're washing away by watering them like they're the plants in the ground there.
Great. Also, any good recommendation for correcting the tree in the lawn with the shallow roots?
If it's already got shallow roots, I don't have good recommendations for that. The best thing I could think of would be considering a turf removal and adding soil over the roots, as well as doing that emitter inline style tubing as a large coil around the tree and giving it a dedicated root zone, a dedicated irrigation zone. And so what you could do is water that tree or the trees on a dedicated zone and start to increase the ability to get water deeper. So I would be using the lowest possible emitter flow rate on the emitter line. I'd be getting 0.4 or 0.5 gallons per hour. And I would have that zone set to like a program C, where it was dedicated to just trees, and I'd be watering very specific to it. Unfortunately, if it's in lawn and you want to keep the lawn, it's probably a tree removal at that point.
Great. And another question on the house calls. Is there any leak detection involved in that?
We do basic leak detection in house calls. And so what that means is we don't have high-powered listening equipment for pinpointing leaks, but you'd be surprised what we can do with a $10 gauge. We basically use a hose bib gauge and a good understanding of hydraulics and how houses are built to diagnose pressure losses, and we can follow pressure losses through the system in some cases, pinpointing them to an actual location with just a gauge and a rudimentary listening device. It looks like one of those old phones from, I don't know, the 1900s, the early 1900s, with a stick on the end. And we can hear losses or leaks in a lot of pipes with that. And so I would say over 90% of the time we can identify a particular item as the leak or a particular section of pipe, and high-powered listening equipment is not necessary in those cases. But on occasion we do refer you to seek that kind of help.
Great. And I think the last thing, could you kind of go in depth a little more about the difference in the programs? I know some timers have programs A, B, C, and D, and/or programs 1, 2, or 3. Can you kind of just expand a little more on that for the customers?
Yeah, I think so. This gets to be a little bit complicated just because there are so many different types of controllers on the market and so many different limitations. I can think of common ones I see daily that only have A and B, and I can think of some that go to D. Imagine everyone is its own controller. So if you have A, B, and C, you have 3 of these mounted to your wall. And in order to make a zone run, you need a day of the week, a number of minutes assigned to the station, and a start time. And so anything that you program, you'll be paying it. This one doesn't light up because it's not plugged into anything. But typically, it'll have a letter in the corner of the screen. And most people spend the entire controller's lifespan in program A, and they never venture out of it. Really, it would be best if you have different plant materials in your yard. If you don't have 100% grass or 100% shrubs, you really should be using A and B at a minimum. Any sort of other dedicated zones that are special out of those categories should fall into a C or D from there. So at my place, I have all my trees on a single line there on program C. Program A and B are for turf and plants. And what that does is allow me to control the days, the frequency of watering more specifically, because we know we can control the start times and the minutes well, within the same program. And oftentimes, people aren't wanting to do all that extra programming, or it's a little bit confusing to scroll through and adjust or look at, and I totally agree with that. But we talked about frequency of watering and what you're teaching your plants with shallow root zones. If the solution to not wanting to use B is to water your plants for less time, but more frequently, then you're doing that shallow root zone teaching where you're giving a tiny bit of water every day, tiny bit of water every day, and that plant doesn't have to look very far to grow further or bigger, and it's going to really just ultimately hold the plant back and have a really long-lasting effect on the quality of the landscape. So, John, did I hit that quite right, or am I still, did I go too far one direction?
No, I think you're great. I think it's a good example of how things can be split up on timers. So, yeah, the only other questions we have here are really a lot of them about people are interested in the house call service, and we have those. So, with that, I'm gonna cut off the questions, and thank you for that, and have a great day.
All right. Well, again, Justin, John, Marty in the background there, thank you so much for spending some time today coming in, presenting this webinar. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. As Justin was referencing, we do have another webinar coming up in May. It's actually Friday, May 14th, again, starting at noon. So you can find that on that same website, roseville.ca.us/gardening workshops. And I'll send out a link so you don't have to remember that. I'll email that out to everybody. I will also be sending out a survey. So if you have a few minutes after this webinar is over, if you could fill out our survey, just helps us know what we did well, what maybe we need to continue improving on with our webinars. And there's also an opportunity for you to provide some other topics, some other things that you might be interested in, because that's what we like to do. We like to respond to our customers, our residents out there in Roseville, and get the information that you're looking for out to you. Also on that same webpage, there's a lot of other resources that are there, other webinars in the past on tomatoes, on vegetable gardening, all sorts of good stuff. So take a little time and explore that site. Well, I think that's about it for us for the day. So thank you guys so much again for joining us. I hope everyone has a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. See you later.